The emergency signal came from the far edge of the galaxy, where the stars grew thin and space turned cold. Admiral Kexthor stood on the bridge of his massive ship, watching the holographic display show red dots spreading across star systems like a disease. Each red dot meant another world had gone silent, another billion lives lost. "How many ships do we have now?" Kexthor asked his aide, a young officer from the crystal planet of Altair. 9,812, sir. The biggest fleet in galactic history. Kexthor nodded, but his four arms remained tense. Even with ships from 12 different species, he wasn't sure it would be enough. The enemy they faced had already destroyed 3 entire star systems. Nothing remained but empty space where planets used to orbit their suns. The Void Swarm had awakened after sleeping for 1,000,000 years. Ancient machines that built more machines, growing stronger with every world they consumed. The oldest races in the galaxy still told stories about them, but most people thought they were just myths. Now those myths were eating everything in their path. "Sir, we're getting responses from the outer worlds," the communications officer reported. "The humans from Earth want to help." Several officers on the bridge made clicking sounds that meant laughter in their species. Humans had only learned to travel between stars 50 years ago. Their technology was so basic that most aliens considered them barely civilized. "What can they possibly send us?" asked Commander Veltar, whose people had been building starships for 10,000 years. "Their biggest ship is smaller than our escape pods." Kexthor raised one of his hands for silence. "Every ship helps. Tell them they can join the fleet." Far across the galaxy, Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair aboard the USS Liberty, reading the message from the alien fleet. The ship hummed around him with the familiar sounds of human engineering. Pumps cycling, fans spinning, computers beeping. Everything was loud and mechanical compared to alien ships, but it worked. "So they're letting us tag along," said Lieutenant Amy Walsh from her position at the navigation controls. She was young for her rank, but she could plot a course through hyperspace better than anyone in the fleet. "Better than being left out," Morrison replied. He was 42 years old, with gray starting to show in his brown hair. He had commanded ships for 15 years, but never in a battle this big. "How long to reach the rally point?" 3 days if we push the engines hard," Amy answered. Dr. Lisa Harper looked up from her medical station. "The crew is ready, Captain. I've got enough supplies for a long fight." She was the ship's doctor, but she also handled the science equipment. Human ships were too small to have specialists for everything. Sergeant Pete Collins entered the bridge, his boots making heavy sounds on the metal floor. He was in charge of the ship's Marines, only 30 soldiers, but they were tough and well-trained. "My people are locked and loaded, sir. Whatever we're fighting, we'll give it a good punch in the face." "That's the spirit," Morrison said. "Chief, Brooks, how are the engines?" Chief Engineer Ryan. Brooks wiped oil from his hands with a dirty cloth. He spent most of his time in the engine room, keeping the ship's reactor running and the weapons charged. "She's not pretty, but she's reliable. We can keep up with any alien ship out there." Morrison stood up and walked to the main display screen. It showed their route to the Kepler 4x42 system, where the alien fleet was gathering. Red warning symbols marked the areas where the Void Swarm had already attacked. The path of destruction was clear. They were heading straight for the galaxy's most populated regions. "Listen up, everyone," Morrison said to his crew of 200 humans. His voice carried through the ship's communication system. "We're going to join the biggest space battle in history. The aliens think we're too small to matter. They're probably right about our size, but they're wrong about our courage." The crew cheered, their voices echoing through the metal corridors. They knew they were heading into danger, but humans had always been good at facing impossible odds. "We represent Earth and everyone on it," Morrison continued. "Our families, our friends, everyone we've ever loved. We're going to show the galaxy what humans can do when we're fighting for something that matters." Amy programmed their course and engaged the hyperdrive. The Liberty jumped into the space between dimensions, racing toward a battle that would decide the fate of billions. Outside the ship, stars stretched into lines of light as they traveled faster than light itself. In his quarters, Morrison looked at a picture of his wife and daughter back on Earth. Sarah and Emma were safe for now, but if the void swarm wasn't stopped, nowhere in the galaxy would be safe. He put the picture away and reviewed the tactical data one more time. The enemy was like nothing anyone had ever fought. Machines that learned from every battle, growing smarter and stronger. They had weapons that could crack planets and shields that stopped the most powerful attacks. The combined might of 12 advanced civilizations might not be enough, but Morrison had something the aliens didn't understand. He had humans who would rather die fighting than give up. He had a crew that would follow him into hell if he asked them to. And sometimes, when the odds were impossible, that was exactly what the universe needed. The Liberty flew through hyperspace toward its destiny, carrying the hopes of humanity into the darkness between the stars. Soon the galaxy would learn what happened when you threatened a species that had climbed to the top of their world's food chain by being too stubborn to know when they were beaten. 3 days later, they would drop out of hyperspace and see the most beautiful and terrifying sight in the galaxy, 10,000 alien warships preparing for the battle of their lives. And somewhere in the darkness beyond, an ancient evil was coming to destroy them all. The USS Liberty dropped out of hyperspace with a flash of blue light. Captain Morrison felt his stomach lurch as the ship returned to normal space. Even after 15 years of space travel, he still hated that feeling. "We're here," Amy Walsh announced from her navigation station. "Kepler 442 system, right where the fleet is supposed to be." Morrison looked at the main screen and felt his breath catch in his throat. The alien fleet stretched across space like a city made of stars. Thousands of ships hung in perfect formation, each one different from the others. Some looked like giant crystals that caught and reflected light in rainbow patterns. Others were smooth and organic, pulsing with soft colors like living creatures. A few seemed to be made of pure energy, contained in frameworks of gleaming metal. "My God," Dr. Harper whispered. "Look at the size of them." The largest ship was as big as Earth's moon. It sat in the center of the formation, like a mountain floating in space. Smaller ships clustered around it, but even the smallest was 10 times larger than the Liberty. "Getting a communication from the flagship," the communications officer reported. "They want to talk to our captain." Morrison straightened his uniform and walked to the communication panel. "Put them through." The screen flickered and showed a creature that Morrison had never seen before. It had 4 arms, blue skin covered in scales, and eyes that glowed with inner light. This was Admiral Kexthor, commander of the greatest fleet in galactic history. "So, you are the human captain," Kexthor said. His voice was deep and rumbling, translated by the ship's computer. "I am Admiral Kexthor. Your ship is very small." "Yes, sir," Morrison replied. "We may be small, but we're ready to fight." Before Kexthor could answer, another voice broke into the conversation. "Fight? That little toy couldn't damage a cargo ship." The speaker was Commander Veltar, whose people built ships from living crystal. "What weapons do you carry? Rocks? Sharp sticks?" Laughter came through the communication system. Morrison could hear dozens of alien voices making sounds that probably meant amusement in their languages. His crew looked angry, but Morrison kept his face calm. "We have nuclear missiles, railguns, and plasma cannons," Morrison said. "Our ship may be small, but our weapons are effective." "Nuclear missiles?" Another alien commander laughed. "We stopped using those thousands of years ago. They're like firecrackers compared to real weapons." Commander Veltar's crystal face showed what might have been a smile. "Perhaps you should stay in the back and watch how a real battle is fought. Try not to get in our way." The communication ended with more alien laughter. Morrison stood quietly for a moment, feeling his crew's anger, like heat from a fire. Sergeant Collins looked ready to punch something. Chief Brooks was muttering curse words under his breath. "Captain," Amy said carefully, "they just told us we're useless." "I heard them," Morrison replied. "But we're not here to prove anything to them. We're here to stop the Void Swarm." "Where do they want us to position the ship?" Amy asked. "As far back as possible," Morrison said. "Fine. Give us a position at the edge of the formation. We'll watch and learn." The Liberty moved slowly through the alien fleet. Up close, the ships were even more impressive. One vessel from the Nexian species looked like a living creature with wings that sparkled with energy. Another ship seemed to be made of liquid metal that flowed and changed shape as they watched. "These ships are thousands of years more advanced than us," Dr. Harper said. "Their smallest weapon could probably destroy our entire ship." "Maybe," Morrison said, "but advanced doesn't always mean better. Sometimes the simple answer is the right answer." They reached their assigned position at the edge of the formation. From here, they could see the entire fleet spread out before them. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "Captain," Lieutenant Walsh said, "I'm picking up some strange readings on long-range sensors. Something big is coming through hyperspace." Morrison walked over to her station. "How big?" "Really big, and there are a lot of them." Amy's hands moved quickly over her controls. "The signatures are weird, like machines, but not any kind I've seen before." Chief Brooks joined them at the sensor station. "These readings don't make sense. The power signatures are off the charts, but the technology looks old. Really old." "Run a full scan," Morrison ordered. "I want to know everything about whatever's coming." The Liberty's sensors were basic compared to alien technology, but they were thorough. While the advanced alien ships focused on preparing their weapons and shields, the human ship quietly gathered data about the approaching enemy. "Got something," Brooks said after several minutes. "The ships out there are using some kind of adaptive technology. Their hulls change properties based on what weapons hit them." "What does that mean?" Morrison asked. "It means they learn, Doctor," Harper said, looking at the data. "Every time someone shoots them, they get better at defending against that type of weapon." Morrison felt a cold chill run down his spine. "So the more we fight them, the stronger they get." "That's what the data suggests," Brooks confirmed. Morrison looked back at the alien fleet. Thousands of ships with the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. If the enemy could adapt to those weapons, what chance did anyone have? Should we warn? "The alien fleet?" Amy asked. Morrison thought about Commander Veltar's laughter and the dismissive way the aliens had treated them. Send the data to Admiral Kexthor. Let him decide what to do with it. The message was sent, but no reply came back. The alien commanders were too busy preparing for battle to pay attention to warnings from a primitive human ship. Energy spikes. All across the fleet, Dr. Harper reported. They're charging their weapons. The enemy is almost here, Amy added. Whatever's coming, it's about to arrive. Morrison sat in his captain's chair and watched the most powerful fleet in Galactic history prepare for battle. Somewhere in the darkness of space, an ancient enemy was approaching. An enemy that learned from every fight and grew stronger with every victory. The aliens thought their advanced technology would save them. They thought the humans were too primitive to help. Soon, both beliefs would be tested in the fire of battle. Morrison touched the picture of his family in his pocket and prepared to find out what happened when the galaxy's greatest weapons met an enemy that could turn their strength against them. Space itself seemed to tear open like fabric. Purple and black energy swirled in massive holes that appeared across the star system. From these holes came the Void Swarm, and Morrison had never seen anything so terrifying in his life. The first ships through were smaller than he expected. Each one looked like a perfect geometric shape. Triangles, cubes, and spheres made of dark metal that seemed to absorb light. But there were millions of them, flowing out of the tiers in space like angry wasps from a broken nest. Holy Mother of God, Sergeant Collins whispered. How many are there? Sensors are having trouble counting, Amy reported. At least 10 million small craft and more coming through. Behind the smaller ships came the giants. Harvesters, Dr. Harper called them, reading from the data they had collected. These ships were enormous, bigger even than the alien flagship. They looked like mechanical spiders with dozens of legs that ended in different tools, saws, drills, scoops, and weapons Morrison couldn't identify. Those things strip planets, Brooks said, his voice tight with fear. They take everything and use it to build more ships. But the worst were the Nexus cores. Only a few came through the portals, but each one was the size of a small moon. They looked like dark crystals covered in lights that pulsed in complex patterns. These were the brains of the Void Swarm, the ancient computers that controlled millions of smaller ships. Fleet Command is giving the order to attack, the communications officer announced. Morrison watched as the alien fleet opened fire. The display was incredible. Beams of pure energy lanced across space, bright enough to hurt the eyes. Missiles. That warped space around them streaked toward their targets. Some ships fired weapons that Morrison couldn't even understand. Reality seemed to bend and twist where they struck. The first volley hit the Void Swarm like a hammer blow. Hundreds of the smaller ships simply vanished, destroyed so completely that nothing remained. The larger ships staggered under the impact, their dark hulls cracking and bleeding strange fluids into space. They're actually winning, Dr. Harper said with amazement. For a moment, it looked like she was right. The alien weapons were incredibly powerful. Ships that had taken millions of years to build were destroyed in seconds. The Void Swarm's perfect. Formations broke apart as ships exploded or spun out of control. Admiral Kexthor's voice came over the fleet communication channel. All ships continue firing. We have them on the run. The alien fleet pressed their attack. Wave after wave of devastating weapons struck the enemy. Morrison watched ship after ship fall to the superior firepower of the Galactic Alliance. Maybe the aliens were right. Maybe their advanced technology was enough. Then Lieutenant Walsh noticed something wrong. "Captain," she said quietly, "look at the sensor readings from the second wave of attacks." Morrison looked at her display and felt his heart sink. The weapons that had been so effective in the first attack were doing less damage now. The energy beams that had cut through enemy hulls were being absorbed or deflected, the reality warping. Missiles were being stopped by shields that hadn't been there before. "They're adapting," Dr. Harper said. "Just like we predicted." "How fast?" Morrison asked. "Faster than should be possible," Brooks replied, studying the data. "It's like they're sharing information instantly across the entire fleet. Every ship learns from what happens to every other ship." The third wave of alien attacks was even less effective. The Void Swarm ships that had seemed helpless minutes before now shrugged off weapons that could destroy planets. Their hulls had changed, becoming reflective where they needed to bounce back energy beams, or flexible where they needed to absorb kinetic impacts. "This is impossible," came a transmission from one of the alien commanders. "Our most powerful weapons aren't even scratching them anymore." The Void Swarm began to fight back. Their weapons were different from anything in the galactic databases. Instead of energy beams or missiles, they fired streams of what looked like liquid shadow. When these streams hit an alien ship, the vessel didn't explode. It simply stopped working. Lights went out, engines died, and the ship drifted helplessly in space. "They're not just destroying the ships," Dr. Harper observed. "They're turning off their technology somehow." The beautiful crystal ships of the Nexian fleet were the first to fall. Their rainbow hulls went dark as shadow streams washed over them. The biomechanical vessels of the Altarians writhed in pain as the enemy weapons turned their own organic systems against them. "Fleet casualties are mounting rapidly," the communications officer reported. "We've lost over 1,000 ships in the last 10 minutes. Morrison watched the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy get torn apart by an enemy that grew stronger. With every second, each destroyed ship taught the Void Swarm something new. Each successful defense made them harder to hurt." "Captain," Sergeant Collins said, "shouldn't we be doing something?" Morrison looked at his small, primitive ship surrounded by the wreckage of vessels 1,000 times more advanced. "What can we do? Our weapons are toys compared to theirs, and if their weapons couldn't hurt the enemy, what chance do we have?" But even as he said it, Morrison was thinking. The Void Swarm had adapted to energy weapons, kinetic weapons, reality-warping devices, and biological attacks. They had learned to counter every piece of advanced technology the galaxy could throw at them. But they had only adapted to things they had encountered. Their learning process was based on analyzing attacks and developing counters. What would happen if they faced something completely outside their experience? "Amy," Morrison said slowly, "what's our status?" "All systems normal," she replied. "They haven't even bothered to target us. We're too small and primitive to register as a threat." "Chief Brooks, what weapons do we have that the aliens don't?" Brooks thought for a moment. "Well, we still use chemical explosives, gunpowder, TNT, stuff like that. Everyone else uses energy weapons or exotic matter. And our nuclear missiles? Basic fusion warheads. Not the fancy antimatter stuff the aliens use." Morrison felt an idea forming in his mind. It was crazy, probably suicidal, but it might be the only chance they had. The battle raged around them as alien ships died by the hundreds. The Void Swarm was winning, learning and adapting faster than anyone had thought possible. Soon they would finish off the galactic fleet and move on to consume every populated world in the galaxy. Unless someone did something they weren't expecting. Morrison stood up and walked to the center of the bridge. His crew looked at him with trust and hope, even though they were facing certain death. "Listen up," Morrison said. "We're going to do something that's either brilliant or completely insane. Probably both. The USS Liberty, smallest and most primitive. Ship in the fleet began to move toward the heart of the battle. 6 hours into the battle, the galaxy's greatest fleet was dying. Morrison watched through the Liberty's main screen as another massive alien battleship went dark. The Nexus ship from the Kepler system, beautiful and elegant with its flowing energy. Wings simply stopped moving as shadow streams washed over its hull. Moments later, void swarm harvesters swarmed over it like mechanical vultures, tearing it apart for raw materials. Fleet strength is down to 30%, Lieutenant Walsh reported, her voice tight with stress. We've lost over 7,000 ships. The numbers were staggering, but the real horror was how completely the enemy had adapted. Weapons that had seemed unstoppable 6 hours ago now had no effect at all. The void swarm ships moved through plasma beams that should have melted them instantly. They absorbed gravitational weapons that should have crushed them into singularities. Look at this, Dr. Harper said, showing Morrison her analysis. Their hull composition has changed completely. What started as basic metal alloys is now some kind of adaptive smart material. It shifts its properties in real time based on incoming threats. Chief Brooks joined them at the science station. It's not just their hulls. Their entire technology base is evolving. Those shadow weapons they're using now, they didn't have those when the battle started. They developed them by studying how our energy weapons work, then building something that does the opposite. Through the communication system, Morrison could hear the growing panic in the alien fleet. Commanders who had been confident and dismissive hours earlier now sounded desperate and afraid. Admiral Kexthor to all ships, came the transmission. Fall back to defensive positions. Repeat, all ships fall back. But there was nowhere to run. The Void Swarm had learned to predict the aliens' tactical movements. Every retreat was anticipated, every defensive formation was countered almost before it was formed. The enemy moved with perfect coordination, like a single organism with millions of parts. Commander Veltar's voice crackled over the emergency channel. They're not just adapting to our weapons. They're adapting to our strategies, our formations, even the way we think. Morrison nodded grimly. The Void Swarm's artificial intelligence was learning everything about their opponents. Not just technology, but psychology, tactics, and behavior patterns. They were becoming perfect at destroying the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. Captain, Sergeant Collins said, my Marines are getting restless. We've been sitting here watching our allies die for 6 hours. When do we join the fight? Morrison looked at his Marine sergeant. Collins was a good soldier, tough and brave, but he didn't understand what they were really facing. Pete, our biggest gun wouldn't scratch the paint on one of those ships. We'd be destroyed before we could fire a single shot. So we just sit here and watch? No, Morrison said quietly. We think. He walked to the tactical display that showed the current battle situation. Red dots marked enemy positions. Blue dots showed surviving Allied ships. The red far outnumbered the blue, and the gap was growing every minute. Amy, show me the enemy movement patterns over the last hour. The display changed to show how the Void Swarm had maneuvered during recent engagements. Morrison studied the data, looking for something the alien commanders had missed. They're learning our patterns, he said finally. But they have patterns too. Look at how they respond to different types of attacks. Dr. Harper joined him at the display. You're right. When faced with energy weapons, they do this. When faced with kinetic weapons, they do that. It's like they have a checklist of responses. Exactly, Morrison said. They're incredibly smart, but they're still machines. They process information and respond logically. What would happen if we did something completely illogical? Chief Brooks scratched his head. Like what? Before Morrison could answer, another wave of alien ships died. The beautiful crystal vessels of Commander Veltar's fleet shattered like glass as the enemy's new resonance weapons found their frequency. The bioships of the Altarian Navy writhed in agony as their own living systems were turned against them. "Fleet Command, this is Captain Morrison of the USS Liberty," Morrison said into his communicator. Admiral Kexthor's voice came back immediately. "Captain Morrison, you should evacuate the area. This battle is lost. Sir, I'd like permission to engage the enemy." There was a long pause. Then Kexthor's voice returned, filled with what might have been pity. "Captain, your ship would be destroyed instantly. These creatures have adapted to weapons 1,000 times more powerful than yours." "That's exactly why I want to try," Morrison replied. "They've never seen weapons like ours." Another pause. "Very well, Captain. You have permission to engage. Try to make your sacrifice count for something." Morrison closed the channel and turned to his crew. They were looking at him with a mixture of fear and determination. They knew they were probably going to die, but they trusted their captain to make it mean something. "All right, people," Morrison said. "Here's what we're going to do. The enemy has adapted to every advanced weapon in the galaxy, but they've never seen good old-fashioned human stubbornness." He activated the ship's internal communications system. "All hands, this is the captain. We're going into battle against an enemy that has defeated the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. They think they've seen everything we can throw at them. They're wrong." The crew laughed nervously. It wasn't much of a battle speech, but it was honest. "Chief Brooks, I want you to modify our nuclear warheads. Strip out all the sophisticated targeting systems and guidance computers. Make them as simple and stupid as possible, sir." Brooks looked confused. "The enemy adapts by analyzing our technology. If there's no technology to analyze, they can't adapt. Make them into flying bombs that do nothing but explode." Understanding dawned on Brooks's face. "Chemical detonators, basic timers, no guidance systems at all, just point and shoot." "Exactly. Sergeant Collins, how much TNT do we have in storage?" "About 2 tons, Collins replied. "We use it for demolition work." "Load it into torpedo casings. Dr. Harper, what's the most corrosive chemical we carry?" "Hydrofluoric acid," she said immediately. "We use it for cleaning fuel lines. It can eat through almost anything." "Perfect. Load that into spray dispensers and mount them on our missiles." The crew looked at their captain like he had lost his mind. They were facing an enemy that had adapted to planet-killing weapons, and he wanted to attack them with chemical explosives and industrial cleaning fluid. But they trusted Morrison, and they had run out of other options. As the alien fleet died around them, the USS Liberty began preparing for the most primitive attack in galactic history. Outside, the Void Swarm continued its methodical destruction of the galaxy's finest ships. Their artificial intelligence cataloged every weapon, every tactic, every desperate strategy the aliens could devise. They were becoming unstoppable, invincible, perfect. They had no idea what was coming for them. The USS Liberty accelerated toward the largest Nexus core like a tiny metal bullet aimed at a mountain. Morrison sat in his captain's chair, watching the massive enemy ship grow larger on the screen. It was beautiful in a terrible way. A dark, crystal structure the size of a small moon, covered in millions of lights that pulsed in complex patterns. "Distance to target, 200 kilometers and closing," Amy Walsh reported. Her hands were steady on the controls, but Morrison could see the tension in her shoulders. The Nexus Core's sensors had detected their approach, but the enemy's artificial intelligence calculated minimal threat from the primitive vessel. A few 100 Void swarm drones peeled away from the main battle to deal with the nuisance. Their hulls had been adapted to resist every advanced weapon in the galactic arsenal. They had never encountered anything like what the humans were about to throw at them. "Chief Brooks, are our modifications ready?" Morrison asked. Brooks wiped sweat from his forehead. He had been working for 3 hours to turn their sophisticated weapons into crude bombs. "All nuclear warheads have been stripped down to basic components. No guidance systems, no electronic targeting, just timer detonators and chemical triggers. They're about as primitive as I can make them." "Good. What about the special packages?" Sergeant Collins finished loading the TNT into torpedo casings. "Dr. Harper has the acid dispensers ready to deploy. I've also rigged some of our spare reactor fuel into makeshift bombs." Morrison nodded. Their plan was insane, but it was the only chance they had. The enemy's learning algorithms were designed to analyze and counter advanced technology. What would they do when faced with weapons that were barely more sophisticated than firecrackers? "Incoming transmission from Admiral Kexthor," the communications officer announced. Morrison accepted the call. The alien admiral's four-armed figure appeared on screen, his blue scales dulled with exhaustion and defeat. "Captain Morrison, you should retreat immediately. We've lost 8,000 ships. Nothing can stop these creatures." "With respect, Admiral, you haven't tried everything yet." Kexthor's glowing eyes focused on Morrison with something like pity. "Captain, your weapons are thousands of years behind ours. If our most advanced technology cannot hurt them, what can your primitive ship possibly accomplish?" Morrison smiled grimly. "Sometimes primitive is exactly what you need." The first wave of Void swarm drones reached them. These ships had adapted their hulls to absorb energy weapons, deflect kinetic projectiles, and resist exotic matter attacks. Their artificial intelligence was confident they could handle anything the small human ship could produce. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. "Fire conventional missiles," Morrison ordered. The Liberty launched 6 standard missiles with chemical warheads. The Void swarm drones moved to intercept them with practiced efficiency. Their defensive systems analyzed the incoming weapons and prepared the appropriate countermeasures. But there was nothing to analyze. The missiles were so simple they barely registered as technology. They were just metal tubes filled with explosives, guided by basic gyroscopes and triggered by impact fuses that hadn't changed in design for 200 years. The first missile struck a drone and exploded with a flash of orange flame. The drone's adaptive hull, designed to counter sophisticated energy weapons, had no defense against a simple chemical explosion. The blast tore through its structure like it was made of paper. "Direct hit," Amy called out. "Enemy ship destroyed." The remaining drones paused for a fraction of a second as their artificial intelligence tried to process what had happened. Their collective knowledge contained data on every advanced weapon system in the galaxy, but nothing about chemical explosives delivered by primitive guidance systems. Morrison pressed their advantage. "Launch the acid dispensers!" The Liberty fired a salvo of Dr. Harper's improvised weapons. Each one was just a spray bottle attached to a rocket motor designed to coat enemy hulls with industrial cleaning fluid. The Void swarm drones moved to avoid them, but the weapons weren't sophisticated enough to be predicted or countered. Hydrofluoric acid splashed across the drones' adaptive hulls. The chemical began eating through their structure at the molecular level, creating weak points and holes. Their self-repair systems tried to compensate, but they had no protocols for dealing with such a primitive attack. "Follow up with TNT torpedoes," Morrison shouted. Sergeant Collins had done his work well. The TNT-filled torpedo casing struck the acid-weakened drones and exploded with devastating effect. Chemical explosions tore through hulls that had been designed to resist planet-killing weapons. Drone after drone disappeared in balls of orange fire and twisted metal. "Impossible," came a transmission from the alien fleet. "The humans are actually damaging them." But Morrison wasn't finished. "Chief Brooks, deploy the reactor fuel bombs." Brooks had taken spare uranium from their reactor and packed it into metal containers with simple chemical detonators. When they exploded, they didn't create the clean fusion reactions of advanced nuclear weapons. Instead, they produced dirty, radioactive blasts that scattered fissile material in all directions. The Void Swarm drones had no protocols for dealing with this kind of primitive nuclear weapon. Their sensors were overwhelmed by the chaotic radiation signatures. Their adaptive systems couldn't figure out how to counter weapons that were more accident than design. "Target the Nexus core," Morrison ordered. "All remaining weapons fire at will." The Liberty emptied its weapons tubes at the massive enemy ship. Chemical explosives, acid dispensers, dirty bombs, and even some welding torches that Chief Brooks had rigged with rocket motors. Nothing sophisticated, nothing the enemy could analyze and counter, just human stubbornness backed by things that went boom. The Nexus Core's mighty shields were designed to stop antimatter beams and reality-warping weapons. They couldn't even detect the primitive chemical attacks until it was too late. Explosions blossomed across its crystalline surface as the human weapons found their mark. For the first time since the battle began, a Nexus core took damage. Lights flickered and went out across sections of its hull. The complex patterns that controlled millions of drones stuttered and became chaotic. "The command network is destabilizing," Dr. Harper announced, watching her sensors. "The drones are losing coordination." Morrison watched as Void Swarm ships began flying erratically. Some collided with each other. Others fired on their own allies. The perfect artificial intelligence that had seemed invincible was crashing like an overloaded computer. "All ships, this is Admiral Kexthor," came the transmission. "The humans have found a weakness. All ships, target the enemy with your most primitive weapons, anything without sophisticated guidance or targeting systems." The surviving alien ships scrambled to comply. Some had emergency supplies of chemical explosives for mining operations. Others fired simple kinetic projectiles. Just metal slugs accelerated by magnetic fields. A few even resorted to ramming attacks using their ships themselves as primitive weapons. The Void Swarm, so perfect at adapting to advanced technology, had no idea how to handle such crude attacks. Their artificial intelligence had never encountered weapons so simple that there was nothing to analyze or counter. Morrison smiled as he watched the tide of battle begin to turn. Humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy wasn't advanced technology or superior strategy. It was the ability to look at an impossible problem and solve it with whatever they had lying around, even if it was just dynamite and cleaning fluid. "Captain," Amy said, "more enemy ships are approaching our position." Morrison looked at the tactical display. Hundreds of Void Swarm vessels were converging on the Liberty, their artificial intelligence finally recognizing the threat posed by humanity's primitive approach to warfare. "Well," Morrison said, "I guess they've figured out we're dangerous. Time to show them just how dangerous humans can be when they're really trying." The explosion of the first Nexus core sent shock waves through the entire Void Swarm network. Morrison watched on his tactical display as millions of enemy ships suddenly stopped moving in perfect formation. Instead, they began bumping into each other, firing randomly and spinning out of control. What's happening to them? Dr. Harper asked, studying her sensor readings. Their network is crashing, Chief Brooks explained, monitoring the electromagnetic signals coming from the enemy fleet. Those Nexus cores aren't just command ships, they're like the brain cells of a giant computer. When we damaged one, we gave the whole system a stroke. Morrison felt a surge of hope. For the first time since the battle began, the enemy looked vulnerable. But he knew it wouldn't last long. The Void Swarm's artificial intelligence was incredibly advanced. It would adapt to their primitive tactics soon enough. Amy, get Admiral Kexthor on the communication channel, Morrison ordered. The alien admiral's face appeared on screen. His 4 arms were gesturing frantically as he tried to coordinate the surviving ships of his fleet. When he saw Morrison, his glowing eyes widened with something that might have been respect. Captain Morrison! Your attack worked! The enemy network is in chaos! It won't last long, Morrison replied. Their artificial intelligence is already trying to compensate. We need to hit them while they're confused. What do you recommend? Morrison studied the tactical display. The Void Swarm was trying to re-establish their network connections, but their coordination was still broken. Ships that had moved like a single organism were now acting independently, making them vulnerable. We need to target their command structure, Morrison said. Every Nexus core, every ship that looks like it's trying to give orders, but we have to use primitive weapons. Anything too sophisticated and they'll adapt to it. Kexthor nodded. I'll relay your orders to the fleet. But, Captain, most of our ships don't carry primitive weapons. Our technology moved beyond chemical, explosives millennia ago. Then improvise, Morrison said. Use whatever you have. Cargo containers filled with metal debris, ships' waste disposal systems, even the emergency food supplies if you have to. The key is to use things that aren't weapons at all. As the alien fleet scrambled to follow Morrison's advice, the Liberty continued its own attack. They had exhausted their supply of modified missiles, but Chief Brooks was nothing if not creative. Captain, Brooks called from the engineering station, I've rigged our waste recycling system to fire compressed garbage at high velocity. It's not pretty, but it should work. Do it, Morrison replied. The Liberty began firing salvos of compressed trash at the nearest Void Swarm ships. Food waste, used clothing, broken electronics, and other debris struck enemy hulls at tremendous speed. The Void Swarm's sophisticated defenses had no protocols for defending against garbage launched from a sewage system. Sergeant Collins had his own ideas about primitive warfare. Captain, my Marines have been loading our emergency flares into makeshift launchers. Permission to fire signal rockets at the enemy? Granted, Morrison said with a grin. Red and white flares streaked across space toward the Void Swarm ships. When they struck, they burned with intense chemical flames that ate through adaptive hulls like acid. The enemy's artificial intelligence couldn't understand how simple emergency signals had become deadly weapons. Across the battlefield, the alien fleet was learning to think like humans. The surviving Nexian ships used their crystal structure to focus starlight into primitive laser beams. The biomechanical Altarian vessels launched pods filled with their own digestive fluids. Even the energy beings found ways to create simple electrical discharges instead of their usual sophisticated energy weapons. It's working, Amy announced. Enemy ships are going down all across the battlefield. Morrison watched as Void Swarm vessels fell to the most ridiculous attacks imaginable. Ships that had survived planet-killing weapons were destroyed by flying tools, improvised explosives, and even chunks of asteroid that the aliens had grabbed with tractor beams and thrown like rocks. But the most important targets were the Nexus cores. These massive ships were the key to the enemy's coordination. As long as they survived, the Void Swarm could eventually reorganize and adapt to the primitive attacks. "There," Morrison said, pointing to a Nexus core that was trying to re-establish contact with its scattered drones. "That one's attempting to restore network control. We need to take it out." "We're out of missiles," Amy reported. "Then we'll have to get creative," Morrison replied. He activated the ship's internal communication system. "All hands, this is the captain. I need every piece of junk on this ship. Broken furniture, old spare parts, anything that can be fired from a torpedo tube." The crew of the Liberty went to work with the kind of enthusiasm that only humans could muster when faced with impossible odds. They stripped furniture from their quarters, gathered broken machinery from storage, and even pulled the decorative plants from the ship's small garden. "This is the most ridiculous attack plan in galactic history," Dr. Harper said as she helped load a coffee maker into a torpedo tube. "That's what makes it perfect," Morrison replied. The Liberty launched everything it had at the Nexus core. Kitchen. Appliances, exercise equipment, spare uniforms, and even a chess set Chief Brooks had been carving from scrap metal. The enemy ship's defenses, designed to stop the most advanced weapons in the galaxy, couldn't cope with being attacked by flying furniture. The improvised projectiles punched through the Nexus core's shields and hull, causing systems failures. Throughout the massive ship, its lights flickered and went dark as the artificial intelligence inside struggled to process damage from weapons that shouldn't exist. "Direct hit!" Amy shouted. "The Nexus core is going offline." As the massive enemy ship died, another wave of chaos spread through the Void Swarm. Thousands of drones lost their connection to the network and began operating on basic programming. They were still dangerous, but they were no longer the perfectly coordinated force that had seemed invincible. Admiral Kexthor's voice came over the communication channel. "All ships, continue the attack. Target any ship that appears to be coordinating others. Use whatever primitive weapons you can improvise." The battle became a bizarre display of creativity and desperation. Ancient civilizations that had forgotten how to fight without technology were rediscovering the art of hitting things with other things. The most advanced fleet in galactic history was winning a battle by throwing junk at their enemies. But Morrison knew they weren't finished yet. The Void Swarm still had millions of ships, and their artificial intelligence was learning from every attack. Soon they would figure out how to counter even the most primitive weapons. "Captain," Dr. Harper said, studying her sensors, "I'm detecting new activity from the remaining Nexus cores. They're trying to create new network protocols." Morrison nodded grimly. The enemy was adapting again, trying to find ways to defend against weapons that were barely more than controlled accidents. The question was whether they could finish off the Void Swarm before their artificial intelligence figured out how to stop flying garbage and improvised explosives. "All right, people," Morrison said to his crew. "Round 2. What else can we throw at them?" The crew looked around the ship, searching for anything else they could turn into a weapon. In the background, the strangest battle in galactic history continued to rage, with the fate of civilization hanging on humanity's ability to weaponize anything they could get their hands on. The final phase of the battle was like nothing anyone had ever seen. The Liberty floated in space, surrounded by the wreckage of thousands of ships, both alien and enemy. Morrison could see the hull was scarred and dented from near misses. But his crew had kept the ship running through sheer determination and lots of coffee. "Status report," Morrison called out. "Life support is holding, but barely," Dr. Harper replied. "We've lost half our air recycling capacity. I've got 17 crew members with injuries, but nothing fatal." "Weapons?" Morrison asked. Chief Brooks laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Captain, we fired everything that wasn't nailed down, and some things that were. I just launched my toolbox at an enemy cruiser. Did it work? Actually, yes. The wrench jammed their weapon ports. Morrison would have smiled if the situation wasn't so desperate. They had been fighting for 12 hours straight, and everyone was exhausted. But the Void Swarm was learning faster than they had hoped. The enemy's artificial intelligence was beginning to develop counters even for primitive attacks. "Captain," Amy called from her station, "the enemy is changing tactics again. They're starting to predict our improvised weapons." Morrison looked at the tactical display. She was right. The Void Swarm ships were beginning to avoid the areas where debris was most likely to hit them. They were developing new shield patterns that could stop even simple kinetic weapons. "They're adapting to chaos itself," Dr. Harper said with amazement. "Their artificial intelligence is learning to be unpredictable." But Morrison noticed something else on the display. In the center of the enemy formation, one Nexus core was larger than all the others. It was surrounded by a defensive shell of smaller ships, and streams of data flowed between it and every other enemy vessel. "There," Morrison said, pointing at the massive ship. "That's the Supreme Nexus, the master computer that controls the whole swarm." "It's huge," Amy whispered, "bigger than Earth's moon." "And it's heavily defended," Sergeant Collins added. "There are thousands of ships protecting it." Morrison studied the enemy formation. The Supreme Nexus was the key to everything. As long as it survived, the Void Swarm could keep learning and adapting. But it was positioned at the center of the enemy fleet, surrounded by layer after layer of protective ships. "Captain," came Admiral Kexthor's voice over the communication channel, "our fleet is down to less than 1,000 ships. We cannot survive much longer." Morrison could hear the exhaustion and defeat in the alien commander's voice. The Galactic fleet had fought bravely, but they were almost finished. If they were going to win this battle, it had to be now. "Amy, plot a course straight through the enemy formation to that Supreme Nexus." "Sir?" Amy's hands paused over her controls. "That's a suicide run. We'd have to fly through the entire enemy fleet." "I know," Morrison replied, "but it's our only chance. If we can destroy their central computer, the whole swarm will collapse." Dr. Harper looked up from her medical station. "Captain, the ship won't survive that kind of attack. Our hull can't take much more damage." Morrison looked around at his crew. They were tired, scared, and facing certain death. But they were also human, which meant they were too stubborn to give up when everything depended on them. "I won't order anyone to come with me," Morrison said. "This is voluntary. Anyone who wants to can transfer to the escape pods and join the alien fleet." Nobody moved. Not one member of his crew even considered abandoning their captain. "Well then," Morrison said with pride, "let's go save the galaxy." The Liberty turned toward the Supreme Nexus and began its final attack run. Every enemy ship in the formation opened fire as the small human vessel charged into their midst. Energy beams and shadow weapons filled the space around them, but Morrison had one advantage the enemy didn't expect. "Chief Brooks, I need everything. You can give me from the engines." "You've got it, Captain, but I should warn you, I'm pushing the reactor way past safe limits. If something goes wrong, we'll go up like a small sun." "Perfect," Morrison replied. "That gives me an idea." As the Liberty flew deeper into the enemy formation, Morrison explained his plan. It was insane, even by human standards, but it might work. "You want to turn our reactor into a bomb?" Dr. Harper asked. "Not just any bomb," Morrison said. "A dirty, primitive chemical reaction that their artificial intelligence has never seen before." We'll overload the reactor with raw materials and let it explode like an old-fashioned atom bomb. That will kill us all, Sergeant Collins pointed out. Maybe, Morrison agreed. But it will definitely kill that Supreme Nexus, and without their central computer, the Void Swarm will tear itself apart. The ship shook as enemy weapons found their mark. Sparks flew from damaged systems, and the lights flickered. But the crew kept working, preparing for humanity's final gambit against an enemy that had thought itself invincible. Almost in range, Amy reported. The Supreme Nexus is 2,000 kilometers ahead. Chief Brooks, start the reactor overload sequence, Morrison ordered. Beginning overload, Brooks replied. We've got maybe 5 minutes before it goes critical. The Liberty pushed through the enemy formation like a bullet through a cloud. Ships exploded around them as the alien fleet provided covering fire, but Morrison only had eyes for the massive enemy command ship ahead. 1,000 kilometers, Amy called out. The Supreme Nexus was trying to move away, but it was too big and slow. Its artificial intelligence was calculating the threat level of the approaching human ship, but it couldn't understand what Morrison was planning. 500 kilometers. Alarms were ringing throughout the Liberty as the reactor moved toward critical overload. The ship was becoming a flying bomb, and everyone knew it. 200 kilometers. Morrison could see the Supreme Nexus clearly now. It was beautiful in its terrible complexity. A crystalline structure covered in billions of lights that pulsed with alien thought. Soon, those lights would go dark forever. Captain, Dr. Harper said quietly, it's been an honor serving with you. The honor was mine, Morrison replied. 50 kilometers and closing, Amy announced. Reactor will go critical in 30 seconds. Morrison activated the ship's communication system one last time. Admiral Kexthor, this is Captain Morrison. Tell Earth that humanity did our duty. Tell them we proved that humans belong among the stars. Captain Morrison, came Kexthor's reply. Your sacrifice will be remembered for 1,000,000 years. 20 seconds to critical, Brooks announced. Morrison looked at his crew one last time. They were facing death with the kind of calm courage that made him proud to be human. Whatever happened next, they had fought well. 10 seconds. The Liberty struck. The Supreme Nexus at full speed, its overloaded reactor creating the most primitive nuclear explosion in galactic history. The blast wasn't clean or sophisticated. It was dirty, chaotic, and impossible for the enemy's artificial intelligence to predict or counter. The explosion tore through the Supreme Nexus like a ball of fire, destroying the master computer that had controlled millions of ships. As the ancient artificial intelligence died, its death scream echoed through every void swarm vessel in the galaxy. When the blast cleared, space was filled with the wreckage of the Supreme Nexus. The massive command ship had been torn apart by the Liberty's primitive nuclear explosion, its billions of lights now dark and cold. But something amazing had happened in those final moments. The escape pods from the Liberty floated safely in space, picked up by alien rescue ships. Morrison and his crew had survived. Chief Brooks had managed to eject the crew in the last seconds before impact, using the ship's emergency systems to save everyone aboard. Captain Morrison, came Admiral Kexthor's voice over the communication channel. You magnificent, crazy human, you did it! Morrison floated in his escape pod, watching the aftermath of the battle through a small window. All across the star system, void swarm ships were destroying each other. Without the Supreme Nexus to coordinate them, their artificial intelligence had collapsed into chaos. Millions of ships that had fought as one organism were now attacking anything that moved, including each other. The entire network is down, Dr. Harper reported from her nearby pod. The void swarm is eating itself alive. Within hours, it was over. The enemy fleet that had seemed invincible just days before was nothing but drifting wreckage. The few ships that survived had reverted to basic programming, making them easy targets for the remaining alien vessels. 3 days later, Morrison stood on the bridge of Admiral Kexthor's flagship. His crew was beside him, all of them wearing new uniforms provided by the alien fleet. The formal ceremony was being broadcast across the galaxy, reaching every civilized world in known space. "Captain Morrison," Admiral Kexthor said in his deep, rumbling voice, "I owe you an apology. When your ship first arrived, I thought humans were too primitive to contribute to this battle. I was wrong." The alien admiral's 4 arms gestured to the holographic display that showed the battle's final moments. "Your species taught us something important. Advanced technology is not always the answer. Sometimes the simplest solution is the most effective." Commander Veltar, whose crystal people had initially mocked the humans, stepped forward. "Captain Morrison, on behalf of the Nexian Republic, I formally request that Earth be granted full membership in the Galactic Council. Your tactical knowledge could be invaluable in future conflicts." Morrison smiled. "Thank you, Commander, but I think you're missing the real lesson here." "What do you mean?" Kexthor asked. "You're trying to learn human tactics like they're just another technology. But that's not how it works. Humans don't fight the way we do because we're primitive. We fight this way because we're creative, because we refuse to accept that any problem is impossible to solve." Morrison walked to the holographic display and pointed to the wreckage of the void swarm. The enemy's artificial intelligence could learn from any logical attack, but humans don't always think logically. We think sideways. We solve problems by using things that were never meant to be solutions. Dr. Harper joined the conversation. The void swarm could adapt to any weapon, but they couldn't adapt to weapons that weren't supposed to be weapons at all. How do you defend against a coffee maker fired from a torpedo tube? How do you counter an attack made from garbage and good intentions? Admiral Kexthor's glowing eyes showed understanding. "You're saying that the strength of humanity is not in your technology, but in your thinking." "Exactly," Morrison replied. "You can study our tactics all you want, but you'll never really understand them until you learn to think like humans. And that means being willing to try things that shouldn't work, just to see if they do." Chief Brooks laughed. "It also means being too stubborn to quit when everyone tells you something is impossible." The alien commanders looked at each other with expressions that might have been respect. They were beginning to understand that humanity's gift to the galaxy wasn't advanced weapons or superior strategy. It was the ability to look at any problem and find a way to solve it, no matter how crazy the solution might be. 6 months later, Morrison stood in his new office at Galactic Command. He wore the uniform of a galactic admiral, with rank insignia, from 12 different species. His title was Director of Unconventional Warfare, and his job was to teach other species how to think like humans. It was harder than it sounded. Most aliens had forgotten how to be creative after thousands of years of relying on advanced technology. They wanted rules and procedures for human-style tactics, but Morrison couldn't give them that. "Creativity can't be programmed," he explained to a class of alien officers. "It comes from being willing to fail, to try stupid ideas, and to use whatever you have available instead of waiting for the perfect tool." Lieutenant Walsh, now a commander herself, entered the classroom. "Admiral, we just received a distress call from the Centauri system. There's a new enemy threat and conventional weapons aren't working." Morrison smiled. "What kind of threat?" energy beings that can absorb any form of directed energy. The local forces are asking for human assistance. Well then, Morrison said to his alien students, let's go show you how humans handle energy. Beings, anyone know where we can get some really big butterfly nets? The alien officers looked confused, but they followed Morrison toward the hangar bay. They were beginning to learn that when humans said something ridiculous, it usually meant they had a plan that just might work. As they boarded the transport ship, Morrison thought about the battle that had changed everything. The Void Swarm had been defeated not by superior technology, but by humanity's refusal to accept defeat. They had proven that sometimes the best answer to an advanced problem was a primitive solution delivered with enough determination to make it work. The galaxy was a safer place now, protected not just by powerful weapons and energy shields, but by a species that could look at any impossible situation and find a way to solve it with whatever they had lying around. The aliens called it the human factor, and military academies across the galaxy were trying to teach it to their students. They would never quite get it right, Morrison knew. The human factor couldn't be taught because it wasn't really about tactics or technology. It was about being human, stubborn, creative, and too crazy to know when something was truly impossible. Morrison settled into his command chair as the ship headed toward Centauri. Somewhere out there, energy beings were threatening a peaceful civilization. They had probably adapted to every conventional weapon the locals could throw at them. They had no idea what was coming for them. Morrison smiled and began planning an attack involving industrial fishing equipment and very large magnets. It was going to be a good day to be human. In the years that followed, humanity's reputation grew throughout the galaxy. They became known as the species that could solve any problem, defeat any enemy, and turn any disaster into a victory through sheer creative stubbornness. Other species learned to call for human help when conventional solutions failed. And deep in space, on a small blue world called Earth, children grew up hearing stories about the day their people saved the galaxy with flying furniture and cleaning supplies. They learned that being human meant never giving up, no matter how impossible the odds might seem. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of humans who were too stubborn to let that stop them. And that, Morrison thought, made all the difference in the universe.